And I call this meeting to order. It is 1:04 on August 22nd, 2022. And so this is a workshop. And I'm going to call roll call. Mayor Pro Tem Villalobos. Is she on? Okay. Councilmember Bunker.
Here.
Councilmember Styler is absent. Councilmember McLeod.
Here.
Councilmember Clinton.
Here.
And I'm Mayor Glaze. If you would rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then for the Texas flag, honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. And please remain standing for the invocation. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, Lord God, thank you so much for the rain that you've provided for us. And Lord God, we do ask for more rain. Heavenly Father, we also want to lift up our accountant as he's having knee surgery today. We just ask that you have your hand upon him and the surgeons. And we just pray for quick healing for him, Lord God. And Lord God, as we go forward and look at all of these provisions in this ordinance, we just ask that you give us wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Give me sharing the screen.
Hey,
Should be in your notebook.
Oh,
so
okay.
we are here to talk about and review the Martindale River Advisory Committee flood damage prevention recommendations to the Martindale City Ordinance, Chapter 153. And it is in your books. Okay,
So Mayor, do you want to just kind of work through the document and go section by section and pause for questions and discussion, or how does council want to go about this?
That's fine with me. You said?
So, what
Jan?
was this cover page about?
So Matthew McGovern gave us that cover page this morning, and let me forward that to Jared so you can put it on the screen.
Because this is ordinance 155.
Right.
Okay, so these are just other recommended changes to a different ordinance.
I believe they're mentioned on here, but Matthew McGovern wanted to discuss these items, or Charlie Olds.
Okay,
This is this is the zoning ordinance.
now this,
the
no,
155 is
Oh, yeah,
different
yeah,
from
yeah.
153.
Okay.
yeah, the cover page is different, and I don't know if y'all have that one.
It's in the agenda packets here, but
Oh, it is.
there it is.
It's just kind of summation.
So I guess we'll go back to that. Our main focus is going to be chapter 153,
I believe.
Flood. flood
Now
prevention.
that's,
This is a different cover.
Matthew, did you,
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
is Matthew online?
Yeah.
I'm
Oh, you got it. Wait a
So,
minute.
Matthew-
You're missing he's missing a page here.
Oh,
Missed it too.
that's not for this meeting.
oh, that's not.
It's not?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Next meeting.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm
So
lost.
I just kind of want to get us focused where we're supposed to be. So 153 it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody's in agreement, right?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, here we go. Got it.
I have a question on the corporate limits of the city. How are we differentiating between that and the city limits? What are we calling the corporate limits of the city?
Those terms are synonymous. So the corporate limits of the city are the city limits.
Okay. I just had a general question, like with this map that I brought, it's the 2017 map. So is there a 2020 map that we're going by and referring to, or are we constantly referring to the 2017 map?
The only map that is in effect now became official by December 30th, 2020. So, and for administrative purposes, we rely on the FEMA map. So if you go to Google, your first return or your first non-ad return will do the FEMA flood map here. You can type in your address. We'll use City Hall.
So this is 2017 or 2020 map?
This is going to be the 2020, the only map in effect right now.
2020 map. Okay, thank you. Put in your address.
So for,
And then it takes a little bit for it to load in, but
for anybody who's maybe watching, who can't read what we're reading, let me just say the recommendation from the advisory group is to review and consider their recommendation to amend Martindale's Title 15 land usage, Chapter 153, flood damage prevention, to better protect land, structures, and people in the floodways and the floodplain.
if there's questions or something.
So are we discussing the first section here?
Yeah, that'd be my
Okay.
recommendation.
Are you guys, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm just wondering, are you guys gonna do any kind of presentation with River Advisory? Are y'all gonna?
No, we're just here to
Okay.
participate.
Okay. Got it.
So,
Sorry, sir. Go ahead.
All right, and in this chapter, we're including more of the ETJ. I guess it's kind of summarize what this is saying. That we're including some of the ETJ in a lot of these changes. We're not regular.
No, it's actually, is that correct? ETJ would be under FEMA requirements, correct? This would only,
Yeah, that's something that we can take a note of, and have Kent review a note regarding what our jurisdictional authorization is.
Yeah.
I noticed here that there's a new reference to chapter 26 or of the water code that might be where the ETJ part comes in.
Chapter 26.
Look at that
Oh,
reference.
of the
real quick.
water code.
26.117. I wonder if that is what is providing the authority. Someone from the River Advisory Board, would you be able to speak on that updated reference?
So what we did is we took the San Marcos flood damage prevention code and incorporated the items in their code that wasn't in our code. And we felt that since San Marcos already has adopted and published their code, that these are good points to have. They're, I would say, legally acceptable to the city of San Marcos, so felt that the city of Martindale would also be acceptable.
I got a quick question for you. So did San Marcos handle their ETJ the same way, referring to FEMA?
That came out of the San Marcos.
That, okay.
Yeah, so chapter, section 26, subchapter, he talks about the authority of local governments within the water code. We'll take that for action. I know when I've looked at this issue previously, yeah, I think this is referencing it here. This is going to be a little bit of an eye chart, but the concern is if you have, it almost meant, you have to have a pollution control and abatement program of the city to extend that authority into other areas. And so, I think it talks about the extraterritorial jurisdiction as it applies to that. But most of this water pollution control duties falls under this pollution control and abatement program, which the city of Martindale to this point does not have.
Is this out of the water?
This is a Texas water code. And
Oh.
this is
okay.
something where we'll want Kent to take a sharper eye at. But
So quick,
when we cite some of these water code authorities, as it relates to regulating stormwater, it has to be, my understanding is that it has to be part of a pollution control program or stormwater management program or activity that the city undertakes.
Uh-huh.
For all intents and purposes, Martindale does not have a stormwater management program or pollution control and abatement program. So that's, I'm not sure what the requirements are or what substantiates such a program. Is it just that ordinance resolution
Mhm.
or something that we spend money on? But
Can I make a statement?
Yeah.
Ex-floodplain administrator, ex-city mayor, council member. General law cities do not have the same authority as home rule cities in San Marcos. So a lot of this interior ETJ areas will be found in the state legislature to give to either the county or the city or a local interlocal agreement with the city and the county. And we have control in the ETJ part of the development. But we always had a interactive agreement with the county floodplain administrator in a certain area. You had to go through the state laws to find out if the city staff or the general law city can enforce it, enactment. This here, as an ex-mayor, floodplain administrator, as soon as the new flood maps and rules and regulations were finalized by FEMA, the city should enact them and change their ordinance to match right away as soon as possible. Now it's being done now. This map, 2020 map. Okay, so we're 2 years behind.
No, that's a 2017 map,
The
but,
new map under authority we realized is the 2020.
right,
I know this is a 2017, but the
Yeah.
2020 map is basically the same thing.
Correct.
Only authorized in 2020.
correct.
So, you're just catching up. My concern within it is, the previous read this is, going beyond FEMA's recommendations into,
the buffer zone.
buffer zone. Acting an authority in a buffer zone where FEMA does say that it doesn't declare it a floodplain or floodway. What authority a general law city would have in doing, enacting a law for that. I don't believe we probably could, but it needs to be looked into.
yeah,
Yeah, let's wait till we get to that.
yeah. So part of this is may include a water pollution control abatement program may include areas within the ETJ. Except from that
Oh,
that section, I think regulation within the ETJ is beyond the
the control.
scope of our authority.
It's state
unless we
limits.
Qualify with this and not. But Randy's point, it's true. As a general law type A city, we have limited authorities and jurisdiction over some of these issues that a home rule city may not, or cities of different size are often governed differently. So
Right.
we'll have to look at. So
Real quick
as we
point.
go, the thought on that is to tie it all back together. As we look at statutory authority and through the rest of the code, any limits to the ETJ, or any authorities being applied to ETJ, we're gonna have to be reviewed by our city attorney
Uh-huh.
to see whether that.
One point, but the water pollution control duties of the city, we are a city, so as long as we stay in our city limits, we could probably do a pollution control and abatement for the city. I mean,
You need to speak with your
yeah.
attorney.
we're talking about the city limits only.
Well,
Michael, what's that?
so
I do speak.
just real quick, I haven't read the full statute. It's been a while since I've last looked at this. It's been a couple months. But there's discussions about population of 10,000 or more, commission assessments of studies, The program shall be employed and retain an adequate number of personnel at full, part-time basis as required. There's a lot of requirements that go into this pollution control and abatement program. And I'm not sure if the city of Martindale will be able to fulfill the statutory requirements of such a program
That's Kansas.
in order to apply it.
Gotcha.
If we can, and we do apply it, then maybe at that point, ETJ comes back into play. But this is where
Okay.
it quickly gets into some heavy
So-
research and parsing out of the different components of the statute. And what have you.
So chapter 16 of the Texas Water Code, that in that first paragraph, so both those 16, 315 and 316 are those?
I believe so. 16, here, pull it back up, is, the title of that is, provisions generally applicable to water development. And then 316. As a general law city, anytime I see generally applied, we're in good hands. Yeah, so actually, that statute in particular of the water code authorizes all political subdivisions to take actions in response to the National Flood Insurance Program. So then it has a list of what can be done. And so that distinction of all political subdivisions would include the city of Martindale. I'm pretty confident that we're okay there.
So we could add the .316 and delete the chapter 26. On the first paragraph.
316 talks about coordination of the Water Development Board in Texas and their role in coordinating with the different programs.
Coordinating with federal programs.
Coordination, so the title of that.
State, federal, oh, I see.
And it starts off
State and federal.
describing what the board shall do and the rest. So as it would extend to us coordinating in response, I think that would make sense. But it's not so much a requirement on a city. It might be implied.
So we're just wondering whether to include or exclude these two
Yeah, whether,
sections of the Texas Water Code.
yeah, and I'm more concerned about chapter 26.
Right.
And that chapter 26 affects those items in red underline or show the additions to our existing ordinance.
Correct.
That second and third edition, the where it starts off, this chapter is applicable to the
Uh-huh.
city's ETJ. I don't know whether that will hold as we go through the review process.
Well, it sounds like that has to go away.
Likely.
So this will be a Kent question.
Yeah.
So the first paragraph is fine.
Yes, except for the reference to chapter 26.
Okay, I was talking about the second.
In effect, you might be able to keep the reference, but qualify it in such a state that the city could say, when applicable, or when the city has a program under chapter 26, then these would apply at that time. Until then, it would not apply. You could create kind of a trigger, if you will, that for the future. But it wouldn't be enforceable, it wouldn't be enforceable at the time of the adoption.
So I guess Bud would do the verbiage on that.
I'd work with them.
Any other, you're sure you should look over the whole document, decide whether it's that with general law city or not. And it's right, it's not how.
When we were talking about adopting the FEMA floodplains and having the most recent date of one, I think in here, doesn't it say that to take the most recent?
Yeah.
So you don't have to amend the ordinance every time a new FEMA.
There should be.
That comes out.
Well, we did amend a couple.
Pay to your FEMA code ordinance that you are, it's just a state letter, we are adopting this regulations from this date set by FEMA as cities of ordinance. So you bring everything up to date that you've got.
Right.
If your base flood elevation is only 6 inches, the FEMA.
So the first paragraph is,
Bring
that.
yourself up.
okay, the second paragraph,
Or you're not.
that one's good, the one on red.
Specifics in.
Just saying that we're using the most recent map.
And typically floodplains maps usually change after a catastrophic flood.
Not all.
Because, let me finish. 2012 came around. We were on that 2012 floodplain map, and then 15 happened. It took a couple of years to do the studies, and then they adopted it in 2020. So,
Yeah, well, we had a flood in 2017 too.
no, but 15 was the big boy. And that's what started all this change. So
Yeah.
I would assume, I'm no expert, but I would assume that floodplain map will probably be several years anyway, till we get something bigger than 15.
Right, that was the first change.
Yeah. So,
It's quite a lengthy process for this.
so I imagine that's federal.
Yes, but to your question, Jan, the next one, discussing the letters of map revisions or updated firms being effective on data such documents, I think that's fine.
Yeah, anybody have a problem with that? The second paragraph, that's all in red.
The ETJ, that's what we're discussing regarding that chapter 26. And so that's those potentials. The reference to clearing, rough cutting vegetation and grading, I don't know if that needs to be in a flood
Show
damage
that up
prevention.
on there. That's actually the fourth
Yeah, so the last
section.
paragraph within that section. I think it's valid policy, something that the city should consider adopting, something we've been working on.
Our grants.
I'm not sure if the placement of being within the flood damage prevention ordinance is the appropriate spot for that.
Now,
What would you recommend?
Either, so my initial thought is putting it within an environmental protection type standard, rather than something focused on loss of property. That's generally what the flood damage prevention ordinance is focused on, that implements the flood insurance program, if you will. And it's focused on property. The issues related to rough clearing, cutting, and disturbing soils, that, in my mind, has more environmental concerns and impacts than a flood damage impact. And so from that standpoint, I think the language, we keep it, we just put it in a different chapter.
In that
Our
same-
code of ordinances,
That same document, just a different, totally different ordinance.
different ordinance.
It all means the same. It's an ordinance. It'll be enforced. Gotcha.
So it'd be like the dark sky ordinance we just passed, putting in a environmental protection ordinance that.
That makes sense to me. What do you think, guys?
So, omit it here, but put it there.
What do you think, Mr.
I think it's an excellent idea that if
Mr. Bunker? Go ahead.
we decide to make any updates in the future, it's easier and legible.
Because this document, once we have a draft, we're going to want to coordinate it with the one that discussed the Water Development Board, because they maintain a cadre of flood experts and they advise us on, they review our flood damage prevention ordinance before we adopted it. They've looked at it since and suggested amendments. We'll want them to take another look at it before we complete the adoption process of the ordinance. So taking this out before it gets to them at some point.
But that's an issue that, if the developer comes in and you're not allowed to start changing land, bulldozing until they come to the city. And that you need an ordinance to say, hey, you can't do that. You have no authority to say.
And we might be able to do that within our building regulations.
Doesn't need to be here, it needs to be before if we get developed. I mean, I've been approached before, do we need a traffic development study? Depending on, yes, I would say, yes, please.
Is that okay with you guys?
Once there is a specific ordinance for clearing and rough cutting, this first section is really kind of a reference material section, so it wouldn't be bad maybe put in there, say, ordinance number 201, brush clearing or environmental
Well,
controls of clearing.
well, how about if we do this? Can we do it at the same time? We can have this, do this ordinance and at the same time do the other ordinance, have multiple.
In the background, I've been working on it.
That way it kind of keeps it a little
So we're
clean.
looking at any property, not just stuff in the floodway and floodplain.
Yeah. Well, we would probably put some parameters on that, like if someone's, out in their yard with their hoe, getting ready to plant some,
Make a garden.
make a garden or something. Their disturbance topsoil, obviously we want to have some distinctions. If we're looking at cut and fill kind of, you're talking about
Yeah.
like feet of elevation difference.
Yeah,
You're looking at developers coming in.
yes, I
It's not homeowners already here in the garden, nothing like that. But your developers, you got to put brakes on. You do have that authority in each county.
We had some of that.
Yeah, so the standard is, like a demolition application, for example. I would recommend that the ordinance clearly state the verbiage that should go in and update the new demolition application. I think that's a great idea, because the developer, or homeowner, builder will actually sign that application with them understanding the rules and ordinances that are tied to that application. So I would make a strong recommendation that with you guys looking at improving or updating the ordinance, put on there the exact verbiage that gets added to the demolition. On the other side of it, standard on a demo permit is 3 feet.
Yeah.
That's a standard that the individual can go 3 feet below grade and still be within demolition. That's a standard.
Yeah,
We could
because
also look at getting more refined, if you will, having, special procedures if you're within the
Flood zone.
flood zone.
That needs to be.
In area, whatever the technical term.
probably should.
Yeah, because I think that last sentence is a little broad or general, because it just refers to the topsoil. And then, as Lee just said, you can find a developer that's going to dig down more than through the topsoil. And then we need to know the difference, say, between what is scarifying or what is grading, or, I mean, how are we defining scarifying there?
Or,
Uh,
no.
And so I think that's because you're differentiating between rough cutting, grading, or scarifying, but we don't know what the differences of those are. And if it's only limited to the topsoil, then that isn't enough.
Well, I do agree with Jared. To specify you're in a floodway versus you're out in floodplain. It's kind of a totally different situation based on where you're doing this, you know. Because it's definitely more critical in a floodway than it would be up out of the floodplain. So I think that needs to be referenced, like you said.
But where does it need to be referenced?
Don't, you could say
In a
flood
different
base.
chapter?
But use the zones as far as clarification on whatever this specifies is what zone you're located. That's a good point.
And then if that zone changes in the future,
Gotcha.
if the map, let's say, for
That's a good
example,
point.
the FEMA map updates and now a property is in a different zone, it doesn't matter because you've already put in place, it's based off the zone.
That's a good point. I agree.
You're talking flood zones, not residential zones.
Yeah, we're talking about flood, flood zone. I think that's a good point.
Your flood maps have certain zones.
Would y'all agree to that? I mean, I think that's a real valid point on your part. That visitor advisor, what do you think? I mean, I think that's a good point. All right, we agree on that one.
Again, this first part is really kind of a reference part, and so you're gonna see deeper in this document that they're gonna talk about. It'll talk about grading.
Okay, we could
It's gonna
put
talk
that,
about ETJ, so
Yeah.
those things will have to be taken out as we.
well, we could put that in the environmental
Yeah.
ordinance, just make it a separate ordinance. Okay.
So, the next section, just mentioning the findings of fact. And then the proposed addition of paragraph C within the findings of fact section. In my mind, I read some of this, or a lot of this, as the recitals that city council would place leading to an ordinance to show the purpose and the intent and the legislative desires of the city council. If putting this here as a finding of fact, if Kent doesn't have an issue with it, I don't have an issue with it, but it reads more of something that would go into, whereas the city council is a trustee of the natural environment, blah, blah, blah. Now therefore, the city hereby ordains that we're not going to allow development within a floodplain. So these sort of things would be captured maybe in that preamble, if you will, section of the ordinance.
Okay.
We could have it here codified as it's written. It's a little awkward, I think, but we'll see what Kent says. If it's legally fine, if we want to just kind of memorialize that in an official way. Okay. But
Okay.
I think the benefit of that is you get new council members and they start looking at the code, they can see what the intent, what's the thought process for new people. Now, there is in there different than San Marcos, 25% ground cover and number 3.
Findings of effect.
So that was our original intent. We have since looked at that a little closer. And in our last meeting, we had a vote to put that's actually in the zoning code. And Adrian, that's what you had up originally, the agenda thing. So that's going to be on a future agenda item. Oh. So the R1 residential designation, the R2, the multiple use, those all are broken out to what is the maximum impervious ground cover we'd like to have. We're basically taking it out of here, and putting it in 155.
And that'd be the appropriate place. to have
So
it.
what, this whole section?
No,
Just- just that-
Just number 3,
Just part of number 3.
about the 25%.
so impervious cover limitations right now are regulated for the design requirements of the different zoning districts within the city. So as John mentioned, in R1, I forget what the reference is. I'm most familiar with the commercial district. The commercial district is up to 70% of the property can be impervious, which is significant amount. And
Yeah.
it makes space for, parking lots and the like, but that's been an issue. That's been.
Concrete parking lot.
Yeah.
Instead of.
But no, we don't want to put up a parking lot here.
If I could say something on that, Jared?
Yeah.
I mean, that was my example with the special use permit on the driveway. What is the impervious cover on that particular property? And, you're saying it's 70%, but, that's one of the issues, I guess, that was of concern for me was, was that really addressed on those plans? Because you're trying to get so many parking spots, things of that nature. And that was kind of what we were talking about last Monday that was kind of the spirit of where I was going with on stuff like that. And so the river committee, like Charlie said, we say, okay, Virginia suggested we just focus on, do this obviously, but from an individual agenda item, do just the impervious cover. So that way it's, like you said, simple and it falls within the confines of a predetermined definition that's already on the book.
Yeah, so, in specific instances, whether a builder development complies with that design criteria would be considered when they submit their building permit application. They have their final design drawings. In some of the preliminary special use permits, variances, and those things that might come up before council, those are obviously considered, but a lot of those plans, to a certain degree, are somewhat notional in terms of how it's going to be striped and where exactly everything's going to be laid down. So you haven't done the geotechnical assessments for the foundations and what have you. So,
How does this interface with your required for 100 square feet of commercial space is required to have at least one parking space per 100 square feet, right?
yeah, so that's something that's a good point. So those might not been here on Zoom. We do have design requirements related to number of parking spaces per square footage of different commercial types, business types. So restaurants would have a certain parking space requirement. Office complex building is going to have a different one potentially. So there is a correlation between size of commercial space and parking area required. So if we start reducing the impervious cover requirement or restrictions, limiting how much impervious cover someone can put on the ground, we start as an effect, if they're building a large commercial space that's going to require a large number of parking spots, we start restricting that impervious cover or restricting their parking spaces if they're using pavement, and therefore restricting also their commercial space in some way. So you start constraining the size of business operating on that property.
But they do have pavement that is pervious. They do. I think San Marcos is going through.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's kind of like a rubberized.
Yeah, there's ways, and they're going through that right now with that studio, that film studio in San Marcos.
SEMA.
Yeah, so they're going through that.
You don't restrict anything, you change what has to be built. And that's what it boils down to, is you can either have a non-pervious parking area, or you can have gravel or gravel on a grid. But you're not changing what they can and can't build, you're changing how they can.
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah, there's different technologies out there now.
It's a good, point is well taken.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna see more rain gardens in around Mark.
And hope to hell San Marcos and Collin doing the same thing, or we're screwed. It's all coming our way. I mean,
Anyways.
okay, go ahead.
Any more discussion on?
What do you think about if they were gonna remove the 25% ground cover in number 3? What if we put a reference to the zoning code, say, impervious cover, see chapter 155? It's in there now. We'd like to change. But it's in there.
Yeah.
155, where?
Well,
I'm at it.
so 155 is our zoning code, and basically making reference within 153, directing somebody to 155 as it
Right,
relates to.
if you're looking for impervious cover, it's a nice reference. This, again, this whole first part is kind of a information, getting acquainted with the code. I don't know, that's my thought. You could reference the zoning code. If you want impervious, if you're looking for impervious cover,
Mhm.
look at chapter 1.
I think that's worthy.
Is there a definition in anywhere about what smart development patterns are that are compact and walkable? Do we know what that refers to? Is there a direct reference? Number 5, smart development patterns that are compact and walkable.
So that's again where I would view that as a recital of, whereas the city desires smart development patterns, et cetera. Defining that would be within the district design the design criteria for each zoning district. So
But I mean, is there,
compact and walkable, in my mind, I initially think that's our mixed use district. So it's placing a priority on our mixed use district. And we might have to, right now, it's very open-ended, but we could apply that more thoroughly. We also could impact how we look at residential zoning and other development. So
but is that defined in 155 or any
Not current.
reference?
not correct. But it would be referent, I believe it's within the San Marcos Unified Development Code. They might describe that.
Well,
I know we received a presentation from the San Marcos River Foundation where they described smart development patterns. In my mind, as I interpreted it personally, I understood those smart development patterns were really focused on that impervious ground cover, more communal living type of development patterns.
Well, we have to define it somewhere if we're mentioning it there.
Right, that's why this language, it's unusual to have these kind of policy preferences without definition listed in ordinance. More typical of something that you'd see whereas the city of Martindale desires smart development patterns, therefore we pass this ordinance that prescribes that you must have this level of density, this amount of impervious ground cover per acre, with some sort of offset, program or credit transfers or what have you that would take place. And we would describe what that would look like in a more fleshed out development code.
Okay.
And that might be something that we look to. More cities are going through this unified development code concept. We kind of do that within I think it's Title 15 of our code of ordinances, where we have zoning and then we have flood damage prevention, and we have this and that. San Marcos is an example, puts all of that in one document and says, here you go.
Okay.
All right, the statement of purpose, no changes there. Description of methods of reducing flood loss in 15304. But this might be an area where my general ignorance is showing, but the difference between floodwaters or channel floodwaters, is floodwaters inclusive of channel floodwaters?
No, not necessarily. Channel floodwaters is something that's always defined as a flood here. Others is reaching beyond that point. The channel is going here. Flood away, flood spreads out of your channel. Then you get flood plain, where it's moving differently. Flood, it's not thick, it's not moving, it's not dangerous.
Channel flood water.
Water.
So it's
Is-
overflowing,
is-
the channel is
is-
overflowing.
But do we mean to say or is that an and?
Maybe
Protected area.
and might be better.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be better. I agree with that. It is kind of confusing and put them together.
Going on. We start getting into different definitions.
And air flood hazard. We could just.
So
The definitions remaining. Okay. Yeah, so this is the, all right, so here's,
This is somewhat, so previously, in our current ordinance,
replace.
we've had a definition of area of special flood hazard. And within that same ordinance, we would have a definition for special flood hazard area. This is just
Which is already, which is defined.
a grammar effect of whether which
Yeah.
case of the word are you using? Are you using the word of, or are you just reorienting the order of words? So we got, I don't have a preference one way or another, whether we define an area of special flood hazard or a special flood hazard area. The terms are synonymous. Question of where we put the definition and whether the definition changed as we deleted one and went to the next.
It'd be nice to be
So where are those
Similar to-
definitions?
San Marcos. Developers are gonna be going San Marcos, Parkville. Seems like a more common term.
The definition remained the same. from what I
So
can
where
tell.
is this?
Well,
It's
it's
definition.
redundant.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay.
You have special flood area hazards already in here. Special flood hazard area comes with the FEMA designation, FEMA.
Right.
We will see throughout the document that where the old definition was referenced, it's now changed to the, what I'm saying is the new name,
Uh-huh.
same definition.
Same definition,
area.
just different naming conventions, more streamlined. All right, the next one, the next change defines what a certified floodplain manager is, which is important for later on when we get to the,
So they're no longer called administrators, huh? Or is that more of a job title?
yes.
Yeah.
This is talking about a certification.
Yeah.
manager, administrator, I think, are closely synonymous, but,
Yeah, gotcha.
we can use floodplain manager instead of
It's
administrator.
FEMA's designation will be
Okay,
certified floodplain managers, certified by FEMA. That's their designation, that's their title.
So we felt, the River Committee talked about this, and that this was a very important part of flood damage prevention. To have a trained, certified floodplain manager, which means there'd be some cost involved, maybe. Somebody's got to be trained.
Yeah, it's not expensive. I found that out, was certified for the city.
Okay.
Back in 2011.
So if you're certified, you understand just all the requirements of it,
You take a 2-week course. Basically.
and you're kind of bound by those requirements, right?
Yeah.
And it's not the place
It's
of
your
it.
job to ensure that the city follows FEMA standards. Which is what I had to change, to have handled, that are 2 years behind. You know, this should have been adopted 2 years ago. So we have been in counties to visit, they've only got one person in the county. I used to work with counties, but they met all the time. Right?
Lee, are you working to get certified? Not yet?
Well, I'll throw this out there. We talked about maybe having interlocal agreement with the county, with like Casey, for example, bringing her on since they're involved in Caldwell County.
That's the most
That's the most,
expedient,
yeah.
efficient.
I couldn't get her to do it.
Yeah.
She thought she was probably retired 2-3 years ago. And she's overwhelmed, like, because every little town doesn't have it. And it's to the benefit of the city to have their own right here.
It'd be worth asking her.
Randy, is there are people that have the certification, contract out their service?
That's how the city paid him, is through a contract. You know, somebody needed to have something checked out.
Yeah, I was just on contract with the city.
You know,
They paid for certification. Paul, at that time, was still up.
Yeah, I like it.
The benefit of having a Casey, she's got that so many years' experience, if she's willing to do it, or the county's willing to do
She
it.
has time to do it.
Yeah, if she's willing or
Right.
capable.
I use her as a great reference because of her experience.
Yeah, that'd be something to reach out and see. So that's another subject.
The next change regarding, the use of the term certification in different contexts. Do each of these contexts come up in the course of the ordinance? Because it's not really, what we have here, not really a definition. More of an explanation. Wondering if those explanations can be made within the subject areas of that regulation where it applies.
There's a lot of places that talk about engineering approval, certified engineering approval. It was kind of used in many different ways. So we tried to unify what the engineer is.
I can give you an example on that here. So let's say a developer comes into the city in years past, even if the city of Martindale did not have a dedicated floodplain administrator. That
We just didn't have someone who's certified.
all right, so let's say that word.
Or knew much of anything.
That
Speaking about myself only.
So that work would have still had to been completed by the developer, and that work would have been done 9 times out of 10 by a PE. Right. They would be the one.
Right, that's how I approach these issues. As they would arise is, you have a PE stamp, you're under his license.
There you
His liability, et
Does it
cetera.
have to be a Texas professional engineer?
Yeah, it has to be certified. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to operate in the state. Okay, so we'll leave that discussion of the means, what certification means for later.
Okay.
Community rating system. I think it just defines it.
Critical facilities. Saying
Critical
what
facility.
structures are exempt kind of thing?
I'm sure-
Facilities definitely can't be in a floodway.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm positive that somewhere in the rest of this ordinance, the term critical facility is used or simply defined in this section.
Well, it says critical feature and something.
Yeah. Land access, again, I assume that that term would be defined or used, term used elsewhere in the ordinance. Define the acronym FEMA.
Okay, this is the big,
Yeah,
the buffer.
floodplain buffer, a designated area that shall extend beyond the existing floodplain limits to ground elevation matching the base flood elevation plus the required freeboard 2 feet where structures will be subject to elevation requirements to provide the same level of protection as those within the base flood plain.
I gotta go.
So this is one that I've had difficulty interpreting. I get the floodplain is buffer, extends the elevation requirements for a building, base flood elevation of the structure, typically it's like the first living floor or whatever, however it's defined. 2 feet above the floodplain. That makes sense. What doesn't make sense to me is the latter part after it describes it 2 feet, where structures will be subject to elevation requirements to provide the same level of protection as those within the base floodplain. So are we extending the territorial boundary of the base floodplain
We're
to
changing
now-
the FEMA map.
be more expansive
For a,
laterally?
for a structure,
So in my mind, so
Basically, you're going out into the FEMA zone.
So where we would have, so where we have these color codes of our base flood map, the hatch markings of
The flood.
floodway, 100-year floodplains in blue, 200 years in orange. The base flood elevation refers to that boundary of the 100-year floodplain. So if we extend the buffer 2 feet, are we suggesting that any land that is less within 2 feet of that line also is subject to the rules of this chapter? So meaning if like you had a house sitting right here, right next to the line of the base flood elevation, but it's only a foot above it, are we extending the boundary laterally to now encompass that house? Or we're just saying anything within that blue area now has to be 2 feet higher than originally required?
I know in San Marcos, like I know right now with the new floodplain maps, if I'm right, Virginia, on this, the BFE is I believe 20 inches for the BFE. I think San Marcos is 24. If that's what you're referring to, they require an additional if you're in that situation.
It's the height of your foundation
Yeah.
to the.
You got it. Yeah, so it's increased by 4 inches. That's San Marcos requires that. The city of San
But
Marcos.
what is this saying?
Do I have to, do I
I don't
have to remap?
So it's a line drawn in the sand. And so if you're on one side of the line, you're a little bit unlucky. If you're on the other side, you're lucky.
We try to determine what that line is.
Right there.
If you're within the base, if you're within your
We're
base.
trying to
flood
understand this
elevation.
definition.
So-
If you're
Floodplain
not,
buffer.
if you're talking, buffer zone to me means that you're talking outside of the defined FEMA.
I'm with
zone.
You're
So there's two
redefining.
parts in that paragraph. So what's not highlighted in that paragraph is talking about 2 feet above, like if you're building a house within the floodplain, you go 2 feet up. Above,
That's your base.
because we
flood
know we're gonna
elevation.
have bigger floods,
Your
right?
BFE.
Right.
Yeah.
So the second part that you had highlighted that is confusing, but I get it, is if you take the current floodplain, so what we discussed is that legally FEMA cannot plan for heavier rain events than we've already had. So like, if we've only had 13 inches in Wimberley, they cannot plan for 20 inches in Wimberley. They can only look at historical form events. So like, what happened in Dilley in the 70s, where they got 50 inches of rain, FEMA cannot plan for 50 inches of rain in Wimberley. So what we were suggesting is to add a buffer to the current floodplain.
You want to extend the floodplain, basically, to have the city put in their own floodplain.
Yes, and I don't know if legally y'all can, or if you can't, but it was something we wanted to do.
Feasibly, that'd be very difficult to do.
And it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars just
I
to
decided
read.
that this is it here, because that's my recommendation, because we're outside the floodplain, how far does the buffer go?
Right,
So you have to put that in fine definite terms, meaning survey,
yeah,
and
and you
come
could,
up with a map.
but that's
Who's gonna
on the
pay for
developer, whoever's developing that piece of.
that? No, you have to have that before your developer comes in, tell your developer, this is our buffer zone.
Well,
And
you
say, well, we're
yeah.
gonna, let's work on it together and make a buffer zone. As a developer, I go, fuck you, you're my friend. But I was distributing, I'm not paying all that extra fee because you don't have an ordinance for it as it is.
And record.
Right. I mean, I
I'm fine with
understand,
updating everything, but adding a buffer zone where
Yeah.
if for a floodplain does not even exist at this point in time, that's FEMA's job.
it is their job.
And you want the city to now incorporate that in.
I
I'm
don't
not,
know.
I'm not agreeing with that at all, I'm sorry. You're going beyond authority, really.
You know, I mean, like,
That was our question.
Yeah.
The authority question I won't be able to answer. Whether we have it or not, it's administratively feasible is
Also-
highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're
Just
talking
because of,
hundreds of thousands of dollars of surveying.
right, well, if we wanted to create a building requirement within the areas that are governed by this flood hazard ordinance and say your structure has to be at least 2 feet above the.
that's what I'm
flood
talking about.
elevation,
That,
That's different. That's, because we already have the map. We already know where that is.
Right.
I can point to it and say it.
Yeah.
this
that's what
spot.
San Marcos does.
That's something we can do. Adding an additional buffer boundary to extend, if I say you have this is part of the city limits. If you had a house, there's a house here in the blue and a house just outside the blue and your neighbors. If we're saying, oh, guess what? Now that neighbor who used to be outside the base flood elevation is now within the base flood elevation buffer zone, that gets difficult.
Do you include the orange?
The whole thing is that it has to be with the BFE, the base flood elevation.
Right.
Base flood elevation is already determined by the map. If you're outside that, you're already higher, period.
Right.
Your ground level is already higher, right? All right, so I'm building my house on this little spot here, I'm within 2 inches of the BFE as exists. You know, but you can't say, build your house from this point 2 foot higher than where your ground level is, because you gotta go back to the BFE, which is already lower. Determined by the man.
So,
The question you asked is an interesting one. You could, because there already is mapped, a 200-year floodplain. You could adopt that potentially as your quote buffer,
right,
because it's already mapped for you.
right.
In terms of an enforcement action, then that feasibility gets a little bit easier. And we just have to look to see whether we have the authority to do something like that or
Yeah.
not. We should, because typically you can go beyond, as long as it's
I think
done in the
that's a good
future.
middle ground. You
Say
know,
that again?
it's a good middle ground to
Yeah.
include the orange
Right.
instead of y'all having to resurvey everything.
Right. And the orange is the 200, make that the buffer?
basically, yeah.
Because you know it's flooded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It kind of includes a little bit of our ETJ that we're worried about, right?
Yeah, it would. There's not a lot of areas within the city's
That
limits
you-
or ETJ where that would apply, but it mostly extends to north of Highway 80. And then some of the other areas near the city
Yeah,
limits.
I see the
It's a lot of that.
sporadic.
Langzola property, the orange that's north of 80 there. Isn't that all?
That's Malta.
I think
Might
this
be.
is the Lanzola one here.
It's out.
So it's out completely, I see.
This is going to be, the
More.
Cotton Center. And these are other private landowners.
Walton.
They're
Oh, I
missing
see,
it.
I
It's
see.
all ETJ.
It is?
A lot of it.
Yeah, but you have to control the development.
Yeah, oh, okay.
You can see, I think this yellow line might be our city limits.
Oh, that line?
Yeah,
Okay.
or about rough approximation.
Yeah,
All right.
Anyway. Go ahead. So what are we saying about this buffer?
I think what we'll look at creating this-
Re-review?
there's two parts. The required 2 feet above base flood elevation is one SOS regulation. I think there'll be broad consensus on that within the council. And then the other is extending a buffer zone that the flood damage prevention ordinance as a whole would also apply. Right now, it only applies to those within the 100-year. And so to extend that to include those areas in orange would also be subject to the rules that are stipulated in the regulation.
That's to include the 200 year.
Yeah.
Legal, this is pre-board now. You know?
It might just be BFE.
24?
It's already, so if it's already 24, then.
It was 24, and it went back to 12. Did it go back to 24 again?
I think it went from 12 to 20.
Safety expressed in
No,
feet
San Marcos is
of
24.
flood level for purpose of floodplain management. And that's 24 feet.
I think it was 20.
Had any other- No. All right, getting through.
Yeah.
The definitions. Flood hazard boundary map, that's that map we're referencing on the side. Flood insurance study that's the report done by FEMA. Includes the maps and stuff. nothing controversial there.
Mhm.
Here we
The
define freeboard.
freeboard.
Questions on that? Going down to the next change, Loma and Lomer. These are terms used
Mhm.
that are official amendments done.
The developer was first, she was dealing with the Lomer first, the letter of map revision. And the developer says, I want to chase the floodways, floodplains in this area, moving back and forth. City would get a copy of that from FEMA saying, this is what the developer wants to do, and if that's granted by the city.
They get a loan.
Then you get the letter of map amendment.
Revision. Oh, amendment, the loan money.
Yeah, that's a whole process that the city really isn't governed by, other than to say that we need to be aware of it when those changes happen. And those changes would then become the basis for making determinations. Next change, RV park.
Having 3 or more. So that would probably be a big question. Only 3 would make an RV park?
Yeah,
But
because
what's the intent behind this definition?
To keep people from putting their trailers in their yards or something?
Long-term
No,
parking.
No?
no, it's because in flooding, Jake Daniel can talk to this.
Mhm.
If you have a piece of property with 20 RVs on it in the floodplain, we're not talking about outside the floodplain. We're talking about in the floodplain, when a heavy rain event is coming at 2 a.m. and half the people are not there to move their RVs, then stuff gets washed into the river. And
Right.
so if it's outside the floodplain, it's not a problem. They can have 3,000 and that'd be up to the city. But within the floodplain, it becomes a safety hazard if they're in their trailer and they don't get the reverse 911 call, and or a pollutant problem if their trailer ends up down the river.
Right.
And so we're saying, what's a manageable number for a landowner to be able to get all the trailers off the property in a safe manner at 2 a.m. Floods don't come at 2 p.m. Think about it, like, look at Tom Goines' property. I mean, Jay, how many trailers did Tom Goines have in his
I
place?
don't know, but if you take between what Tom had and Pecan Park, there's at least 4 of them still in there.
There's still one
You know
there.
what I'm saying?
There's one right there, never been.
The way I handled it before, if someone wanted to come in and take some of FEMA's land, we have a lot of unused land FEMA donated, come out of 1984. And gentlemen want to come in and put RV parks, so the short-term or long-term, short-term meaning is Austin, the most places say is 2 weeks. RV comes and moves every 2 weeks, you can't stay in the park in Austin longer than 2 weeks. Long-term is, these guys want to rent them out for, they put an RV trailer in there and rent it out as a home for a year or so. I said, I'm gonna tell you what, because what we're gonna do is you put one in, they want to take the trailer tons off, they want to do everything out, nobody's around.
Make a deck.
So when the alarm goes off, which we didn't have at the time, so that would be me watching the flood gauges, and I give you a warning. I said, you put one of those up, and then you go get your vehicle that's gonna tow those things because it's not located on site. And I'm gonna time you from the time I gave you the warning, it's gonna take you to take the disconnects off, take down the fence, pull that thing out, and we'll divide it in the amount of time I've got when that water hits flood stage here.
Right.
So that's not gonna give me very many. That's the point. You're not gonna get me.
You're not gonna get many out. If a big flood is coming, and we know there are big floods coming,
So
they're
this
gonna
is,
happen.
my problem with stating this is you're gonna allow people to stay 60 days or 12 months in an RV. I don't think the city wants that on their land.
But if it's only, well, not on their land,
That's,
That's-
or any private land.
we're not talking about city property.
You're not talking about a recreational vehicle parking. Really?
We're just saying, how many
Right, yeah.
can one landowner get off their property when a flood is coming?
You know, you made a good point, Jay. You made a good point, Virginia. The Con Park happened in 15 and a couple of them. The problem is they come out pollution and those trailer frames are all over the river
They're
and,
all over. the
and they
place.
never get them out. So who's going to get them out? You know, that's, the state doesn't. So, you know,
Because Tom didn't have the majority of the trailers.
no, it was
It
Pecan
was
Park.
Pecan Park. So
Yeah.
if you just take Tom Goines as one example,
Well, I
you,
used, my trailer was sitting at Thompson, 2015.
Right.
We still lived in Katy at the time. So, you know, it's coming on close to water safari time, right? We're all happy because it's finally raining because 2015 was pretty bloody dry.
Yep.
And we got all these texts going back. And the last text I sent was about 11 o'clock at night that said, but it's rained a foot in Blanco in the first gauge at Fisher's store. So at 12:30, because once I get to sleep, I get to sleep. My wife is shaking me. She says, Tom just called. And he said, if you want to save your trailer, you better come now. So
from Houston,
from Katy, so all of my stuff sitting by the garage door, put it in the back of the truck, one stop. And of course, I only drove 75 miles an hour because that's I made one stop at Buggy's to make sure I fill up because
there's not going to be any gas.
because once the power goes out, let me tell you, after all the years of working for the city of Houston, you know, once power goes out, you're SOL as far as fuel. So I go in, you know, where it drops down as you're going into Pecan Park and the retreat. Volunteer fire department guy says, you can't come in here, we're evacuating this place. I said, I know, I'm going to get that trailer. I've got it, hooked it up, you know, boom, boom, boom. Ground was so saturated that I was digging a hole to China to the point where I thought I was gonna leave my four-wheel drive truck that I pulled all kinds of crazy stuff out of mud and whatever. And I got the heck out of it.
So you did get it out?
No,
Oh,
you had to leave it. You know, next morning it's up against Tom's barn.
That's the point.
yeah.
You know, and that was, somebody got hooked up to it. I was the only person there trying to hook up. And that was from 2.5 hours away.
And at the time, that trailer was not in the, it was not in the floodway, right? It was in the floodplain.
I don't actually know because it was next to, you know, between Dwayne's house and the barn. And so Dwayne's house was built initially to, when Tom moved it in there, it was a foot or 2 feet over what at that time
Oh,
was the
what
base
was
flood
recommended?
elevation. But then,
2015 turned fire into floodway.
well, no,
Yeah.
but 98 turned a bunch of that into flood. That's, I thought you said 84 earlier, and I don't remember a flood in 84, it was low water.
89.
Uh,
98,
We haven't had
98
that.
was a big one. 2002 was a big one.
so all that to say
98.
is,
17, 98.
There we go.
what was
Huh?
that?
What was
So
that?
it's online.
10,
98.
17, 1998. It was the week after I got married.
So
But
that's
you're-
the point. It's not to
Right.
restrict an RV park. It's to say, what is a safe number of RVs in a floodplain? We're not talking about dry land.
Yeah.
Although it's gonna be hard to move an RV when it's gotten 6 inches of rain on dry, you know. But
So are 3 too many now?
that's for y'all to decide.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I'm
We're suggesting.
really getting to the point is
Right.
we've got to look at these numbers and decide.
We don't have any zoning for RV parks inside the limits.
Yeah, but it's something we've been looking to correct for a while now.
But even on that piece of land next to Allen Bates Park, that's private property. And I think they have 3 recreational vehicles sitting there on private property right
And
now.
they've been
in
there
the
for longer
floodplain.
than 60 days.
So.
So that's an RV park.
So
There's a floodway.
we're defining.
What way?
We're defining RV parks for the purpose of prohibiting them. right?
In the floodway.
Is that what you're
In
saying?
the floodway.
Well, to create a safe environment and ability to get them off the property, that's the concern. One person has
Yes.
3 RVs on the property.
But you say none in the floodway, right?
Yeah, so the problem I have is
3 or
the
more.
definition is somewhat reactive. How do you proactively enforce this definition? Because you need a 12-month period, and you gotta sit there and say, oh, you had two, oh, you got a third, shot, start the clock. Oh, 45 days, oh, they left. Oh, well, still going. And then, so
Administratively.
it's hard to apply the definition that we're using to cite and enforce the regulation. I think something that the River Advisory Committee wants to work on, zoning members, city council, myself, we can look at other ways to define an RV park other than the number of movable structures and time durations.
How would you do that?
It would almost be, I like where you're going with this, I think. Because at that point, it'd be like, okay, is there an electrical stand for it? Is there sewage hookup, and is there water hookup? And that
Site design.
indicates that it's a permanent situation, or
But you have to look at it.
potentially permanent.
These are one of the few things that are even allowed by FEMA inflow. They give you land,
Right.
regulate.
No, and it's interesting.
Campgrounds, RV parks, soccer fields, baseball diamonds, all that.
I know, my master's and my undergrad in Parks and Recreation. So where do you build parks? They're all in floodways or
Right,
floodplains.
exactly.
So
But it is
It comes down to your warning system.
Morning.
But
system,
not if you have one human that has 20 RVs on their spot and 10 of the people are gone.
Well, I think that's where I think you're getting close to the definition that he's looking for too, because my RV sitting at the house, you know, if something happens, I'm gonna hook up to it and go. What we don't want, like my cousin used to do at Wolf Bend, you know, he lived in Bastrop, so he left an RV there because when he worked in this area, it was easy for him to stay overnight. What we don't want is, for lack of a better term in my part, is an unattended trailer.
Yes.
We don't want, you
Yeah,
know,
somebody.
we don't want these places being used as storage lots. Because if we're spending the night there, odds are, I mean, if I'd have been here, you know, when that happened, I would have been able to hook up and leave, right? Maybe, I mean, it was still pretty far.
You go by Austin and other areas, they have a 2-week minimum max.
Right, so
You gotta move to another campground somewhere.
I think somehow how is it, we don't want it left unattended, and I don't pretend to be smart enough to know how to define that off the top of my head.
At one
So-
point, when we were reviewing our zoning ordinances in a workshop setting, we were prohibiting all campgrounds from operating within the floodway. We use definitions there, draft definitions there. I can look and see what we came up with at that time. See if it makes sense to apply that here, but looking for the definition to be something where I know it when I see it kind of situation. Not to
Right.
quote the Supreme Court justice on that similar topic, or different topic, but
It's
similar
pretty
situation.
similar in my book.
You know, have a definition that more encompasses that know it when I see it sort of situation. Like, you know, unattended RVs, the number of which, when we start talking span of days over a period of time, that gets real difficult for us.
Right.
Well, and I think, Randy, is that right? I think you said, you know, when you start seeing them build decks and, you know, steps and, you know, skirtum and that sort of thing, you know, that's no longer an RV, that's a,
Permanent
that's a-
structure.
Right.
Okay.
So,
So at that point, they would need to be 2 feet above
No, they're in the floodway. You can't put a
Well,
permanent
some of them are
structure
in
in
the
the
flood-
floodway.
But some of them are in the
Well,
floodplain.
when you start adding decks and things, you become a permanent structure.
Right.
Right. So therefore, you can't even be in the floodway. period.
I know, but even if they have a trailer or an RV in the floodplain, if they build a fence and a skirt, then that floodplain RV better be 2 feet above that VFE. Because it's a permanent structure.
It's difficult.
Right, say you're private
So you're
home
saying-
and you've got your RV parked next to your house is above your BFE. Your RV is not, I don't see requiring people to have an RV in a floodplain, because floodplain is not fast moving water, pick up your RV and set it down in the river. That's why it's floodplain and not floodway.
But when Jay's RV got picked up, the previous floodplain map showed floodplain. The 2015 flood changed that to floodway because the velocity got so high there, because we had never had a flood like that.
That's when the maps were changed, yeah. So we're all in agreement, no RVs in the floodway. We're in agreement with that. Not allowed, period, zero. So we're talking about the floodplain at this point. It
No
So-
unattended.
could, you know what, that could be the term,
Unattended.
unattended in the floodplain, unattended.
But what's unattended? Can they leave for the?
I don't know
weekend?
if
Can
it's,
they leave to the grocery store? Can they leave
Yeah.
to the?
And well, it'd have to say unattended for a certain amount of, for 2 weeks. or-
Right, and are y'all going to look at that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Force that.
For example, say like Mr. Bunker said, if somebody has an RV in their front yard and it's in the floodplain and they live there full time, they're obvious they could move it out in time because they live there. Well, I mean, still though, I mean,
Hopefully they're taking it with them.
but I'm still saying they're there. I mean, we could do that terminology. I mean, somebody that has it for a weekender and they leave it there,
We'll find a way to get after this.
Okay.
Regulatory floodway, some happy to glad have changes must for shall.
Yeah.
I don't have any issues with that definition.
Clarifying stuff. That's okay. That looks okay to me.
Um,
And we've already reviewed that.
talk about, variance. I want to be,
Alteration. Where are we at?
Can I read something on this?
yeah,
Start of construction.
So,
All right, number 2, we got it. So this is, the head of this is,
variances,
Oh, I see.
this is currently in the code ordinance. Variances shall not be issued within any designated floodway if any increase in flood levels during the base flood discharge would result. I'll throw that out there. That's
Okay.
currently in.
This is what that's basically saying, in my understanding. I can't go up the level of my land to get higher than what the current,
FEMA states that you can move land within the floodway to another floodway area, but you can't bring in dirt. Right. So
it has to be in flood because to do that.
so you, what were you reading from?
I was reading from our current,
Oh,
section 54-64, variance procedures. These are the procedures I follow when someone's requesting a variance project.
yeah, under the zoning. I think,
Yeah.
I think
you do
the,
not get a variance in the floodway.
I think the issue of variance, because there's code of federal regulations here to consider, there's also state law regarding how variances work. This is one that Ken and I, we nodded at, hey, and this is something that we'll probably have to look deeper into before we start changing that language. Generally, as it's defined here, probably okay.
I think FEMA allows you to build in the floodway with zero rise in water certificate an engineer, certified engineer, that you call zero rise water is just not viable. The city can ban building in flood period.
Yeah.
Or it does, it should. But by FEMA, it can't. Your insurance company, if you borrow money, your bank's not going to let you do that. But I like the fact that Florida states, no, you get no variance in the floodway, period. Problems with variances, the city's granting variances, is, hey, you granted him one, I'm doing the same thing, why can't you give me one too?
That's pretty. Your application doesn't. Yeah. It's a beauty contest. All right, working flood model. So help me understand this. So in my mind, when I read this definition, I'm thinking of a computer generated model based off of data. And then somebody, it's on the engineer or whomever firm that puts one of these models together and go and have it approved by FEMA. They get like a certificate of approval or something like that. How do we know whether a model is approved by FEMA? Because I mean, like any computer program or that deals with data, put bad data in, get bad results out.
It's covered in your Lomar conditional letter of application. This basically says, I'm gonna change, anybody changes anything in the working flood model. With
They
the
have
map
to
is,
have the
ask
amendment.
well, you, the redundant act, because FEMA is requiring you to send me a proof to me by engineering study.
Yeah.
That you're not affecting this.
So the working flood model is something that is contained within a loaner.
The Lomar saying, I want to change the way the flood model is on my property. So here's an example. The San Marcos River Ranch Estates. I get a call from them, the floodplain administrator for the city of Montana. I've got something you need to sign from FEMA. Really, not even like jurisdiction.
Yeah.
As far as FEMA representing. But they changed their letter of recommendation. They wanted to change the flood levels above the dam here, lower the flood, the BFEs, but raise it below the dam.
Yeah.
That's changed. So that's what they sent me, rather than FEMA said, we're gonna divert the flow of water to the river, and we're gonna put it in our lakes, and then we're gonna put it in this creek that runs behind it and empties into the river below the dam. That's changing the flood model.
So is that a static thing where it's like a so is a model another term for a map?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, I guess what we're doing when they're doing drainage for the roads. That's
Potentially.
changing the model of what happened.
So
Working flood
modeling.
Oh,
So that is a computer generated program, right?
Mark Dev is not currently.
So how does the discussion we were having is how do we know an approved model versus a non-approved model? And it's the Loma that results from that model being accepted by FEMA. It's like after the fact, it's approved. Because we don't have like a working flood model within
right.
City of Martindale.
So the purpose of the 2D modeling is to basically say, I've got a 3,000 square foot home. And so typically what an engineer will come in and say, that will not raise the floodplain more than X, right? But they don't need a 2D model for that. But the 2D model is much more accurate when they can estimate like X amount of rain inches on this rooftop and driveway, and how much is that going to increase the flooding right there. So 2D modeling.
This is for every house put in, or this is
Yeah.
for developer? Anybody buys a lot, decides to build a house, they got to supply you with it.
I mean, that's ideal.
I think if you, even if you have 30 inches of rain on a rooftop, the net effect of flooding is what?
But you're talking about.
A 1/16 of an inch?
Yeah.
Maybe?
How many homes?
What
are
about
going
a
into this area?
subdivision?
Well, yeah, but if you're applying it to a specific home,
Yeah,
your engineer almost every single time is going to say,
I know.
it's negligible. No concern. Now, if you're doing 4,000 homes, all
What if
putting
you're
out
doing-
a 1/16 of an inch.
What if you're
You're
doing
like, oh,
11 lots where they're building 11 homes
Maybe.
and they're selling them individually? Don't you want to know what that's going to do to downtown Martindale?
I would.
Yes. I would love-
Those are going to be individual lots. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but your
Take that.
developer is developing lots, they put.
It may be
requirement
sold
for square
individually.
footage on, most developers put a square footage minimum maximum on a house. City had, one house per half acre inside the city limit.
Yeah.
But that comes with the developer, it doesn't come with the guy, I'm gonna build my house, blah, blah, I'm building a house. You gotta get that built into the developers, okay?
You have a thought?
Well, I think however you want to approach it, but at the end of the day, it's a cumulative thing, right?
Right.
Because if we've got, 100 lots that are 100 acres and we're gonna, and, whether it's a developer or I've sold 100 acres and split it into 100, now, I've sold you the acre, now you go do whatever you want to. I'm not a developer, I'm just gonna have a ranch.
Right.
So I think it comes back to the same thing you said earlier, is we're gonna require it for one, we gotta require it for all. And, with the house, it's not going to be, rocket science, that PE's gotta sign off on it and it's done. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, well, if it's a big subdivision and what we're worried about is impervious cover so that everything drains well and naturally
Right.
like it's supposed to.
Right.
Instead of the homes or floodwaters either going too fast over what should be absorbed
Right.
or blocked because the building's too big and water has to be diverted around it. So I don't know. And I know that you've been trying to get more impervious cover per, I don't know. We're trying to increase that.
I guess my question,
Yeah, less impervious. We want to decrease the
Right.
impervious cover.
Just
I get-
describe then how
my question,
15 plays with all this. This is where we start using this working flood model.
that's my question.
Like, the city certified floodplain manager would make available and notify individuals or entities proposing development. It changed the bus flood or occurring satellite fields. The working flood model shall be inclusive of the cumulative. I'm having a hard time understanding how this. It seems like it's a data set with a black box in the software system, and the certified floodplain manager would change the data set as updates come in. And then we provide that as like, hey, here's your basis of analysis, Mr. Engineer or Mrs. Engineer. Like, I don't get it.
I'm just trying to think
This is my question.
where we can be.
Right, this is like it's like almost like a mapping.
What's the end game with all this data?
Yeah,
What's the end game for this working
So
model?
I guess back to the 2D modeling, a good question for engineers, it would just be a question you could ask your engineer friends is how uncommon is 2D modeling? How expensive is it? If it's like, we never do that, no engineer in town does that, then maybe it is only for developers. Is 5 homes a development? Is 50 homes a
When you're
development?
when you are asking for a big elevation by the engineer,
Right,
and you do the same thing at the same time.
Right.
A one-time cost. You have to add, you not only do you need a certificate of engineering, you need a certificate of.
2D modeling.
It also doesn't just pertain to developers.
Yeah.
If you're remodeling for any reason. a
If you're changing the square footage.
or percentage of remodeling is being completed in all these rules on someone that's lived in a house.
Well, maybe if they don't change the footprint, then they don't need to do the 2D, you know what I'm saying?
It's
The
not adding an
footprint
addition,
doesn't-
it's not adding
yeah.
an addition.
They could be
Well, with
grandfathered in.
2D modeling, a lot of that I have seen has to do with the building materials also taken into account on that. So if I'm changing building materials used from an old footer, rebuild, I'm literally changing how that modeling. That's just what I.
And there's several places up and down the river already where somebody took and said, oh, I had a barn here. And now I'm gonna knock this barn down and now I'm gonna put in a whatever. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 places off the top of my head where, it's within this, it's within the letter of the law, whether or not it's within the spirit of the law, it's two different things.
Yeah.
We'll do some digging on this flood
Yeah.
model, come back. The next change, 15307, just makes updates to reflect the preferred nomenclature of a special flood hazard area. And then the next change,
Back up, should we change the date on that, 2012?
we capture it. So as I understand the process, the insurance study
Got it.
and the insurance study was done in 2012.
Gotcha, okay.
A new map was published.
Got it, I got it. That's my question.
And then we incorporate any revisions thereto are hereby adopted by reference and declared to be part of this chapter. So if they come out with a 2023 version, I think
That's pretty,
that
got it.
qualifies.
Thanks for,
So the next section, the Caldwell County unincorporated areas, this is for purposes of the ETJ. That my understanding of
Basis for establishing.
adopting the insurance study for Caldwell County's unincorporated areas. Because previously we specifically referenced Martindale.
Yeah, we're trying to capture some of the area that's outside the city,
Okay.
so we can't do that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't see any harm in it. Whether we have any jurisdiction or authority over it, is not an issue.
wait and see.
Yeah.
But,
That's a,
but it wouldn't hurt us to
but Kent would pick that up if we have it.
Well, you'd only have jurisdiction in ETJ.
What's that?
It would only be for ETJ.
Yeah, that's where that would.
You have to have, that's the attorney, you have to put in that verbiage, say, unincorporated within the part,
I think the intent of that is if you've got drainage area that comes through town, and it's like, it comes from beyond the ETJ, so you want, I know, but you want something in there where you at least got, a place to start throwing mud back in.
All right, so the next section, the next paragraph talks about that floodplain buffer. We're gonna look to revise that based on the discussion previously.
Yeah.
And then describes a requirement for any limits of flood insurance stage listed by a landowner shall be submitted to public. Are we allowed to enter, this is a question I don't know the answer to, so I'm gonna ask it broadly in case someone knows, but are we allowed to interject ourselves into the submission process of,
I would say that you, I was asking for you to be notified if they're gonna do that.
yeah,
I kind of like that.
but the distinction of shall be approved by our certified floodplain manager in writing prior to submission to FEMA, I don't know if we can legally prevent a homeowner from submitting their submission to FEMA.
What you can do now by not allowing any structure to be built in a floodway, you've already been in that, that's there.
It's almost a protective thing for the prospective home builders. What you're trying to do is not have them send something in and then find out later, oh, wait, but it doesn't, because the local ordinance can always be stronger than, on the line.
Yeah.
You want to get a copy of that letter that they're sending the FEMA for the request for revision. And see if FEMA's got it too, to look at it. I mean, because I got a call from the developer, says that you sign, and it was the fact that it says here you have a copy of the letter from me. FEMA sent it to you.
So every
I got a
house
spare here somewhere, so you're gonna have a
kind of
spare. You have
flood
mine.
hazard area
So this eliminates the
has to
developer
have
from being the
blessing.
middleman to hand it to you, the city.
Okay.
You want a copy for it, at the same time they send it to FEMA to give you a
Or me.
copy. So, yeah, I'm aware it comes. My question.
You have a problem with that?
Okay, my-
Shall be, oh, I see.
This is
You're outside of it.
this is pretty significant.
Obviously doing something.
No
different.
significant occupancy shall be
That is.
issued to
Yeah,
any
that is.
structure until all data supporting that compliance with this chapter has been submitted and approved by certified floodplain manager.
I think in effect, it's already the case, but in terms of like the base flood elevation and things, because that's going to be part of the building permit process. What this calls it a question, is,
Modifications of the
if they did
floodplain.
not have a certified floodplain manager approve in writing their submission to FEMA, we can now reject their ability to obtain a certificate of occupancy.
You may not have the authority to do that.
Exactly.
Request that you get a letter prior to. You want to see if you're going to send them to FEMA, I want to send it to me too at the same time. Here's the thing, you guys have to, talking about seeing if you can get Casey Miles to be a floodplain visitor. You got another county in your ETJ, in another county, you have to get that floodplain administrator also. Or you hire one that handles all your city in ETJ. Or you get the agreement from both floodplain managers who work with the city.
So Jerry, what do you think about that last statement? What's your,
Highlight it and rethink it.
It's generally true, because it's going to be part of the building permit process. So if the landowner comes in and says, I want to build a structure here, and get a building permit for it, that building permit requirement, if they're within the flood, the jurisdiction of the flood damage prevention ordinance, then they're going to have to show their land survey with BFE, elevations and everything else. So by default, through the building permit process, they'll have to comply with this. And you only get a certificate of occupancy after you comply with the building permit process. So I think it's going to take care of itself within, separate from where we're setting extra requirements that are outside that building permitting process, like this notice requirement. Lee, what do you got?
It needs, my recommendation is to replace no certificate of occupancy with building permit.
There you go.
Certificate of occupancy I use for other things.
okay,
We're getting a new business, it's coming in, renting space, in town. they are gonna be requesting. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It does. Like a new use, if you're converting a general store to a restaurant, you're going to get a new. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Development permits compliant. The next change, 5325. City council to appoint a person to be service floodplain administrator. It's appointing a certified floodplain manager to be the administrator.
Pretty straightforward.
That person is responsible for all of this and more is 4.1, 4.2, 4.3.
That's already 1.1, 1.2 already in place.
so you think this is redundant?
4.2
Oh,
and
well, shall submit. I do.
4.1 already. Those are already part of the process.
For any permit. Right?
For building permits to develop, remodel.
So they're just specifying this for floodplain permit.
We already have this, as we say. We
Yeah.
haven't made it yet, but we already have it.
Is that within our building permit ordinance?
Yeah, it requires it.
Yeah.
All right. Continuing on.
Are we at? Number 9.
Yeah, we're continuing.
Duties of floodplain.
Yeah.
Here they're calling it duties and responsibilities of floodplain administrator, not a manager.
Well, at the start of this section, floodplain administrator must be a certified floodplain manager.
Right, okay, gotcha.
We probably want to stick with one definition or one description of that role and responsibility. Certified floodplain manager is a credential, essentially. I think I understand this. It has requirements that a community shall notify FEMA. At the end, it says the developer, well, ignoring the passive voice, the developer shall submit. It's not clear who is notifying FEMA, so we're gonna wanna change the passive voice in this paragraph to say who's actually submitting. This just talks about the expense,
Requesting a change in extent.
but who's pressing send?
No cost to the city.
I would say that's the developer, not the city. Any thoughts on that?
I agree.
So if somebody's asking.
And then we were
So
talking about
that
this
seem okay?
floodplain model thing, we'll have to talk to an
Working.
engineer. Sure why it's,
It's already, well, that.
it
that
was already
part's not-
there, but
Yeah. National Flood Insurance. News.
really,
I
maybe
have
the
no
floodplain
idea.
administrator, but. All right, permitting procedures,
You have to go through this whole thing. It's already been 2 hours.
we can quit anytime you want. It's your workshop.
I don't know. What do y'all think? It's already been 2 hours.
I'd say we'll go through it. I just get her done.
I do have a hard stop.
What's your schedule like?
Today?
We have to stop at
I have a hard
4.
stop at 4.
Let's go to 4, then, shut her down. Let's try to get as much done as we can. While we're all here.
So this, So this is what's weird to me. Why would you do a structural analysis of an as-built structure?
Analysis
you're-
of as built. Huh?
Oh, this is,
It's like some structure that's already built somewhere else and wants to be put, no?
I think of it as a final inspection.
Oh.
I get prints from an engineer that happened to have the electrical layout on it. Their final inspection, I will go in and compare what's on the print compared to what I see. And they should know.
So is structural analysis a good terminology for you? Or you prefer that?
Structural analysis would come from the civil engineer.
Okay, so what would you,
So they would have to. So that's samples that concrete samples, then off to a lab, make sure the PSI is correct, et cetera.
we're talking about electrical, foundations?
Yeah.
Structural analysis.
Example. I'm using that as an example, the
Oh.
structural analysis, that point.
So it looks like if there's been a revision or amendment,
this as a,
then you need to have some kind of inspection.
as a practical matter, I don't like to put verbs with inanimate objects. Somebody shall, not something shall. So on this one, the shall should be placed on the person. So the developer, the applicant for the development shall provide a structural analysis of as-built structures. Blah, 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 blah,
Right,
blah.
who's gonna do the
So you've
structural
got that,
analysis?
it's okay to have that ahead of time, which you should have that ahead of time.
Application.
Right,
What they're doing, it's the as-built that you want to, as-built reference, of course, after.
as it's being built.
No,
It's
after
different.
you're right before, because your only next step is certificate of occupancy would be the next step.
So-
So your as-built.
In the process, if you're going to build a house, you're going to start with a survey, and then you're going to have a rough outline of the layout where the house is going to be. And then you're going to generally describe where the walls are going to be, and then you have these different completion stages. And then finally, you're going to have 100% completed drawing. And then that 100% completed drawing, that's basically your blueprints, if you will. That's how it's going to be built. Then the builder goes and builds it according to those blueprints with 100% drawings. After that's done, engineer would walk around with their own drawings and say, yep, this is how I drew it up. And then certifies a final copy of those plans as the as-built plans.
Okay.
So that's after the structure's already been built, already been reviewed. And so structural analysis is of an as-built structure seems to be a weird time.
Yeah, but it
You're
looks
probably
like-
doing a structural analysis before you have the as-built, because you're doing that as part of
You
the.
don't do that to the fact.
As built, I mean, and certainly big construction projects, it has to do with what changed along the way. So let's say that the water line's supposed to run straight, but man, they're going along and they're trenching, and you know, the world's biggest rock is in the way. And so now they've got to go around it over here. It really doesn't matter on a day-to-day thing, but when you come in later and you're gonna get an additional electrical service. And if you still got that original drawing in there that shows that water line's going straight, you know, they could go cutting along 20 feet over, or I guess it'd be,
Right,
first,
hit.
it could be electrical first and
And
catch, put in the water line. But that's what, like, when I worked for Houston, we would run into this all the time with parks, you know, it's like, there's water shooting 40 feet in the air. Well, there's the plumbers, like, there's no water line there. Look, here's the plans, you know, except for there's still water shooting 40 feet. So that's where the as-built thing comes in. It's really after the fact situation more than.
so you'd want,
Specifically on people on the riverbank or within a floodway. Right.
yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time understanding.
I am, yeah, I agree with you. It's just, I agree with you.
think it's doing?
I think you're asking us a question that should have been answered.
Way
months ago.
before,
Show
yeah.
Compatibility.
Before.
That should have been, that should have been asked before any dirt work was completed. And there are certain cases where you do want to let somebody know ahead of time before you get to the as-built, because you're coming in to do an inspection at the as-built portion, and they did not notify you of substantial change, you can flag it and shut it down, because they didn't
You're
let
right.
you know when that happened. As far as this is concerned, show compatibility, that should have been done on, whether that's the 2D model or the,
Yeah.
you know, certified, you know.
So that helps. The next sentence. When a construction is directly off the riverbank or within a floodway, a loamer is required from FEMA. Whose requirement is that? Is that FEMA's? Or is that a new requirement that we're establishing? Because I thought a loamer is, it's on the behest of the landowner. Like, they can choose to do a loamer, or they can choose not to do a loamer. Are we requiring a loamer? In which case, if they're not doing anything that would change the flood impact study, because they're, you know, because the way they engineered it, there's no loamer to be done. There's no revision. Because if it's all on stilts and it's, you know, there's nothing that's going to impede the flow of water.
Or their surveyor showed that they were outside of that.
Yeah, then there won't be a loan.
That's correct.
There'll be no need for one. So,
This seems like if there is a loan.
Well-
Proof of loan. But this
when
is
construction is
permit
directly off of a
proceed.
riverbank or within a floodway, a waiver is required. By whom?
And what, at what distance, what is classified as directly on the riverbank? We're talking about the riparian zone, we're talking about 6 feet off the riverbank, are we talking
The
about
alluvium
summer?
floodplain. The alluvium plain or whatever.
Exactly.
What is that?
The floodplain joke, sorry, can't get it. We'll think about that. So
Fancy terms.
directly off the riverbank. Like,
Do you have any thoughts on that one? No? All right, we'll take it under advisement. We'll figure, I think the intent is
Why?
be extra super cautious with people building houses next, on properties adjacent to the river bank.
Yes.
A lot of it.
Kind of makes me happy, by the way, that what we're arguing about is nomenclature, not about intent.
Now,
So,
it's about making sure we can enforce this thing.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
so.
yeah, I'm all, I kind of see what you're getting. And I'm all for it, so we got to do what we can.
All right. We'll put a pin in that one. We'll figure out what to do with it later, I guess.
I've been putting rethink.
We've got 3. I know engineers and architects are kind of like, you know,
Model. Maintain a record of such.
they think they're different.
Well, they're different.
Yeah, they're different.
Who
But
you talking about?
to a layman, you design stuff that gets built. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter in this case.
So what do we, what
And,
are we arguing?
is an architect not qualified to consider these things?
I know architects that, well, I know architects that have gone to a lot more schooling than professional engineers.
Yeah.
As far as, you know, and they go to school together, or their curriculum is a lot of the same. So I'm not sure.
It's not a knowledge thing, it's a, you know.
It's a stamp.
I'm a
Who
architect, I'm a
has
professional
the-
engineer, and architect can't tell you that your retaining wall is gonna stand up. Even though they're the one that designed it, you know, it's gotta be stamped by an engineer to say that retaining wall.
Oh,
Not in all cases, not every. That's not-
So guys, what do you suggest?
I'm not-
license.
I'm just questioning the deletion.
Well, we're trying to put some teeth into the permitting application. I mean,
Is it for liability
Yeah.
reasons, or what?
So is, and
For understanding what problems could arise.
What about,
Being close to the floodway, so does an architect have this knowledge as much as an architect? I don't know. I'll just say that, is he certified in the state? And
Texas
As
license
as a
professional.
property owner, if I had a property owner, or if I own property on the river and I had an issue with, I would rather have an issue with an architect than I would necessarily a professional engineer. Most professional
Yeah.
engineers that I know they'll be working on all different kinds of projects where an architect kind of sticks to his field.
how about,
The state of Texas,
I'm sorry, how about if we just put, just say, Texas licensed professional engineer and just keep it architect and don't require him to be a licensed.
both of them should, in my opinion, it's all right to have registered professional engineer and architect, or architect, but they need to be state of Texas
Both of them.
licensed, yes. Because I'm looking for that seal hanging drawing, so that I know who You know,
Including the
when I-
architect.
when I present drawings to P and Z.
Okay.
You know, that's something that, I want to look for. That's a requirement. And the good thing is, a lot of that's already required in our.
Okay.
ordinances.
Well, what's an example of a non-residential flood-proof structure, like a storage shed?
Yeah.
I would say that if the bathhouse over at Spencer is probably a good example. I think been there since 1983, and it's been flooded every time that can't.
And it stays.
And it stays. The roof's never come off of it.
It was concrete blocks.
Yeah.
Big trees protected.
And that would mean that their kitchen there too would be is that a non-residential? I mean, you're not living in the kitchen, so you're just going there to cook.
Right.
You're not living in it, right? Okay.
But it all should stay, should be attached, not, you don't want
Oh, that's,
stoves and
you're
appliances.
talking about the pavilion over there?
At Spencer's, where they have a bathroom structure and they have a kitchen structure as well,
But that kitchen-
separate structures in the
I see what
floodway.
you're saying, but the kitchen structure is not enclosed. It's just,
So like a little
It's
pole
just,
barn, yeah.
like basically a pole barn.
Yeah.
And it's stood up since about 85, so,
It didn't ever get
A lot
washed.
has to do with the trees,
well, it has the trees, the highways in the way.
Yeah,
so
you're right.
You've got substantially
Yeah.
reduced flow at that point, but the point being, you take, pardon me, you take 2015, where, it's all the way up in Finley's house and everything, it's coming about as fast as it can come. It just stood up to it, but, same thing, I mean, you have the same situation at Pecan Park, there's a concrete block restroom, it's
Definitely
Just-
flooded.
Yes. Cleaned them both out at that time. I've gone to class.
So would you say a certificate from a Texas licensed professional engineer or Texas licensed architect? Is that what we're looking at?
They're happy with you? Okay, let's
Either one.
go with that.
It's who can you go after is the bottom line. Who stamped it?
Go with that. Okay.
If we're doing
This thing.
the existing, is that, it's being remodeled?
Grandfather, you mean?
It's already existing, what,
I don't
somebody
really
has to come in
understand
and
what
get a
that's
permit
referring to.
or
Well,
certificate?
I think I'll use my house, for example. When we got here, it was still outside of the floodplain. House has never flooded. But in the 2020 revision, the house now sits in the floodplain. So I could not come back and add on to the house just at grade. I would have to follow all of the, I'd have to raise the new section and do all that sorts of things. Now, I could sit on that same footprint, build
Go up,
a
yeah.
condominium or something.
Mhm.
Charlie probably wouldn't like that.
My house now is in the floodway.
Yeah.
My house now is in the floodway.
And did it flood in 15?
No,
So,
but the water was all around it.
right, so that's interesting because what Randy said earlier is not always entirely accurate. Maybe Virginia said it. They look at historical data, but they're also looking a little bit down the road because some of these things get put into the floodplain that happen. Yes, it's when we moved in, the crazy thing was the lender said, oh, no, you don't have to have flood insurance. Like, we know, but we're gonna have it, and so then about a week later, we get a deal that says, you have to have flood insurance. It's like, well, we know, we've got it, it's back and forth.
Yeah,
You only have to have flood insurance if you're financing it. If you pay cash, you don't have to have flood insurance.
Well, and you're also not gonna
Yeah.
be in the NFIP,
Yeah.
agree?
Uh,
Everything along this
okay.
river, it's not a matter of if it's gonna flood, it's a matter of when it's.
I totally agree.
More discussion about the working flood model.
Okay.
Figure what that's all about.
So you happy with that verbiage up there, Jared? How about the
Not really, I
professional, the licensed professional engineer and
oh,
architect?
that part, yeah, I did.
Okay with
The
that,
second
so we're-
half that I'm not digesting regarding that structure.
Fireproof.
While we're looking at non-residential flood-proof structures
Yeah.
and instead of just all structures, I don't know why we're being so prescriptive here.
I agree. Okay.
Like, how would you prefer it? Just any structure?
Yeah,
Instead of
any
non-residential.
structure that's subject to this ordinance.
That
So,
subject to a
you know,
permit.
that's subject to a permit.
So is like, Spencer's is such a great example because it's.
But that's outside the city limits.
Okay, say it were in the city. So when you have 4 little posts and you've got a roof, is that subject to it?
Maybe.
But I thought also when I was making a big hoopla about a storage shed in the floodway, the previous administration said that if it's only a certain size, like 10, bigger than 10 by 10, that it is allowed in the floodway. And I challenged that because I didn't know what was being stored in that storage shed. Is it gasoline? Is it mowers? Is it oil and all that? So there needs to be more clarification about these structures that are in the floodway that are storage sheds being built in the floodway.
Even
Well,
if
you
it's empty,
can
that's
put-
gonna be corrugated. sand
Oh,
on
it's
the river.
trash in the river.
It's trash in
Yeah,
the
I
river.
totally agree.
Yeah,
Nothing like that should be in the floodway.
I totally agree.
right, no,
I mean, we have a storage shed in the floodway right now upstream from the park. And we've got gazebos and storage sheds and trailers and telephone poles with electricity in the floodway. Now, that's gonna be a whole nother discussion.
Move on and put that up there recently.
And how
No,
do we
it's
handle
been there
existing
a long
structures?
time.
I mean, existing, like, are they people, I guess some have to be grandfathered in? I mean,
I don't
It
know.
would be.
Yeah,
Or
but
it has
still,
to be part of the design process. I mean,
I don't know. I think
having
are
been city
these,
staff before, one of those things is somebody told you that it was okay because it was this size.
Mhm.
You know what, how that stuff happened? It's because some sorry son of a gun like me didn't want to deal with the council and said, this is back when I worked for Houston, you guys are fine. It didn't want to work with council, so it'd be like, yeah, it's a rule. And nobody ever challenges it. When you're the middle guy on the say, you say no, you say, and get all the way from the mayor, and you say yes then, right? But it's, I don't mean any disrespect for the city staff here, but then it's like it's how it's done, man.
Mhm.
I tell you what, admins, you talk about the ones who make the rules, it's the people who are dealing with the public every day, because it never makes
the
it to
ones
you.
that have to.
Yeah, we've always done it that way. It's always been 100 square foot building can be built anywhere you want to build it. Man, you can store nuclear material in it. We don't care. But we do. And so you're right. Some of these things need to be defined. You can, power poles in floodways, it sounds terrible
there
because
something
they're
about
gonna,
Non-permanent structures.
but, they're designed, and when we built Buffalo Bayou Park in Houston, that everything between Allen Parkway and Memorial Drive is designed to go underwater. And it doesn't impede the flow, as it was, at least that's what the engineers told us, right?
That they do have a 2D model.
Yeah.
They had 3D models.
well, for example, my house, I had it raised 3 feet.
Right.
Well, I put as much ventilation for water to pass through as possible. And I spent $1,000 on Simpson ties, hurricane straps,
Yeah.
big old bolts down to the pier so it won't float. It's gonna stay, that kind of
So
thing. That was just a,
the grandfathering is always gonna be the thing that bites you the most.
Yeah.
exactly.
And you can't tell somebody to go take their house out. I mean, you could, but who wants to be dealing with that lawsuit? But on the other hand, man, if you build a house up here and I find out, or better yet, downstream from me and find out it got permitted and it's in the floodway and now my house flooded because that thing,
Yeah.
guess what, then.
Meanwhile, they are building one in the floodway over in the ski ranch. They built.
That's okay, there's a house up there that's gonna be in the river next big flood.
Oh, well, I don't know if we're getting off subject, but
Yeah.
I actually, I had a guy call me. He was saying, he thought I was a pier expert, and I could build him a pier. I said, no, I'm not pier building. And he actually said, I don't want to be so close to the road. I want to be closer to the river. And he actually said that, put it on stilts. And I said to him, do you understand that you're going, where they are, with a road going there by the ski ranch? He wanted to go below that road because he wanted to be away from his neighbors. I said, do you understand? Have you been around here? You're gonna have cypress trees bumping up against your house. Some people just don't know. I'll leave it at that.
But I think the bottom line is this is what we're trying to do, we're trying to protect people with not with what's happened in the past, but with what's coming down the road.
Yeah.
And it's real easy it's easy for me, I can't speak for the rest of you to gripe about stuff that's happened in the past, and we know better.
So,
Go ahead.
so the issue that Sam raised is what is subject to the floodplain permit procedure. So it's new construction. In my reading of this, I was considering the new is new residential buildings and substantial improvements and other non-residential structures. So substantial improvements are essentially, anything done to a structure that equal to 50% or more that the value. Non-residential structures, where is it? Should have discussed it. Had to do with things that are a structure, floodplain management purposes is a walled and roof building. So the problem we have is for certain size sheds, what do you call those things? Pergola? No, not pergola. Those gazebos and stuff like that. Unless they're of a substantial size, I forget what it is, 10 by 10 or 12 by 12. You don't need a building permit for it. So
Right.
that's where
10 by 10 structures, you don't need a permit.
Is that through the international code or?
But I
that's
think
the
in the
international building.
floodway it should not be permitted.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Well, no
Floodway
structures.
and flood-
Well, it's not a permanent structure, though. You can move the gazebo out if you think you could. I mean, they moved it in there really quick on the weekend, so
Yeah.
I think they could move it out. And a bigger storage shed, though. The storage shed is bigger than 10 by 10 because I went there and measured it. With the police with me, excuse me.
Oh.
I had the authority of the police with me when we measured it.
So if this is something that where we don't want to permit temporary movable structures from being placed within the floodway, it would come out explicit and say.
I'm game.
I see
Yeah.
you complicate, this is where it can get real complicated, because we look at all this area that we have, new parkland. And if you ask me, as a park and rec professional, if I want porta cans over there, if I want permanent restrooms with the associated
Concrete block.
concrete block and everything, I would much rather have to clean up a jacked up septic system and a permanent block restroom structure than to have to go dig porta cans out of the river.
Yeah.
Because these floods only happen on holidays too, guess the porta cans are full.
Yeah.
So,
But can't it be in the floodplain instead of the floodway?
Right,
Like,
that's the,
Right.
that's the question.
Yes, and that's what it
Like,
should-
just
I
move
should-
it back and then you can build it, right?
Mhm.
yeah, I don't always distinguish, I mean, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I don't think any bathroom should be built in the floodway.
page
Yeah.
22, Mr. Jared on the screen. And talks about That's the part of flood hazard reduction, general standards. And A, which is current. So A is the current, I haven't struck through, but it says new construction, substantial improvements should be adequately anchored, prevented from flotation. And this is for special flood hazard areas. So we would like to change that to any new construction or substantial reconstruction shall not be allowed, will not allow permanent structures in the floodway.
Do not allow permanent structures. Regulatory.
But
What do you
we were
classify
saying,
as
what
a
if they're
structure?
non-permanent structures?
Classifies as a structure.
Structures defined
Go ahead.
for floodplain management purposes, a wall and roof building, including gas or liquid storage tank that is principally above ground, as well
That
as
sounds
a
good.
manufactured home, walled and roofed. So a pole barn.
So currently, it's allowed if it's anchored, if it's short away. That doesn't seem like very good.
Shall not allow permanent structures. So what do you allow? All block bathrooms,
Well, the definition says it all,
but
right?
that's in the floodway. It should be in the,
Yes,
it should be in the. Right?
it's different. This is floodway.
Right.
The map again. Show the floodway and how much of the dam is how that.
And the hatched
That's the floodway.
is the floodway.
Yeah.
Pretty close to Main Street.
You understand that rule will apply. If there
Well,
was.
all property owners on the river.
So.
So if the mayor's house got swept away, she would not be allowed
That is correct.
to rebuild it.
That is correct.
And neither would mine.
That's why I put Simpson ties on it.
Ours are both in the floodway.
But we don't have, but there's not a substantial current, but that's another subject.
Well, then, well, I hate for people not to be able to build back.
Well, it does
It's in the
prevent
floodway
future
now.
damage by limiting.
I don't know.
You can kind of see how this,
Am I reconstruction?
Yeah.
At this point, I think, in my opinion, I don't think you, I mean, it'd be nice to prevent it, but I don't think you really can prevent it. You know, I mean, even if it's a repeat, repeat flooding, you know, that, you know, FEMA, that's when the buyouts start happening. FEMA comes in because of the repetitive loss.
and then we also, we'd have to consider on this one, this would get to Kent, but would this be considered an administrative taking, which is protected under the Constitution without due process? Other such.
I don't know. I don't like.
If you prevent if you have the authority or ability to do something today, and we say tomorrow you no longer have the ability to do that thing, then, and you won't afford a due process as that decision was made, it gets a little tricky.
And the
I'm
problem
not
is,
sure how to handle, maybe there's already carve outs as it comes to zoning and other stuff.
Well, again, that's why you come back to both of these properties along, everything that's parked over, not everything, but was at one point had a house on it or something.
Yeah.
Or somebody was doing something and FEMA bought most of that after 98. And then, and I assume they just turned it over to the city or turned it over for $1 or whatever function they used for it.
well, there's one problem with a floodway though, because there's different areas of floodway, like where you live, Catherine, and I live, we're in the floodway, but we don't have the current. I mean, you go down where my pit,
This map does not make the.
that's the problem, that is a problem. That is a problem,
But
but it's a distinction without a difference,
You know-
right? Because if you come in and you do something else on your property, even though the current flow is low there, you've changed. where
Oh, I
it flows
see what you're
somewhere
saying.
else.
Well, I think then maybe, well, I don't know. Maybe some kind of exception or appeal process to the city council.
So you, I mean, I hear you, but how, from a litigious standpoint, how do you avoid getting sued by the person you said no to?
That's the problem.
Yeah, anytime you have a
But they
Mother
can
May
choose.
all our special exception, special use permit, certificate of appropriateness stuff, that always makes my toes curl. I'm like, ooh,
We let them, but
turns it.
we're not gonna let anybody else.
And it's also, it's different, we go back to when we were talking about the travel trailers. It's a different thing. That's not,
Oh, yeah.
that's a.
That's gonna float. That's gonna
Your-
float.
Your big problem, right?
That's gonna float in 2
If my
feet.
house gets knocked down, and I'm in the ETJ, I'm not in the city limits, my house gets knocked down, and you tell me, oh, Jay, sorry, but you can't rebuild your house,
Yeah, even though
You know,
you're
it's like-
planning on doing a block.
that's okay,
Oh.
because, whoever was supposed to issue
On
the
steps.
permit, I'm gonna sue for everything I can afford to pay a lawyer for.
Yeah.
Because,
I agree, I want my home back.
um,
So if you build it up, that doesn't count as being
well, I think this,
outside the floodway if you build it 3 feet higher?
I guess you would, that's a question, do you come in and do
Why
that?
can't
But that's where
I
we.
thought
That's
you
when the
could
loaner
do
would
that.
come in.
What's that?
That's when the loaner would come in.
Yeah, and you get into the whole thing with, repetitive loss, that's, again, that's where we've ended up with parkland, is because FEMA they weren't gonna pay for it anymore. You flooded as many times as we're gonna pay for it,
And that's not a good
now we're
thing.
gonna buy you out.
No.
Yeah.
that's not a good
That's a
thing.
slow,
No.
agonizing process.
Right. And then there's places that didn't flood that they bought, like Cochran's old place, it's like, we'll go ahead and buy it because it might flood, because it was between the two.
All right.
Complicated.
I need to go
Right.
drink something, man, it's too much.
I think that's a good spot to leave it. I think we'll
Yeah.
just come back to a future workshop, kick it to the staff, chew on it a little bit. The big things for me is
Stop at.
Go ahead, Jerry.
we stopped at, well, the permitting process.
Yeah,
We went through the permitting procedures and stopped prior to going into the variance procedure.
Well, I have Lee here, and so, I've talked to him a little bit about the clearing that was done in the river on the Langzola property, and I know it was a maximum of 5 acres, and then CEQ got involved, but was that clearing then thus fine and permitted, and then it's okay, or putting the dirt on the hill between the bridge and the White House? Are what we're trying to create here, is it gonna prevent that from occurring again?
Or moving dirt, like we've said at the top. It's not a flood damage issue. Unless it's like a massive, dike that they're building. It's an environmental.
Environmental, I agree with that.
Of
Separate.
sediment control. So from TCEQ, they came in, they reviewed it, and it had some minor notices, but on the whole, they have the right screens up in place to control the sedimentation.
Not true. They got a fine because they
Did
didn't
they?
have the right.
Yeah.
screen.
How
Well,
much-
yeah,
they didn't have the right what?
that's why I made the caveat.
Yeah.
On the whole, they can continue on. There were some minor stuff that
I
they
think you
found.
can go back to your question earlier about what's excavation, what's scarifying, and that sort of thing. What they did,
was all of those and more. I mean, tree stumps have been ground out and removed. The ground has been, I mean, every bit of vegetation has been removed. But yet, yes, they did remove metal, they did remove tires, they cleaned it up. And so conceptually, you would think that the water would then move through faster and not obstruct debris. And so the water is moving through faster. Well, that seems fine.
Well, except for what they've done at this point, if they don't stabilize that pretty darn.
You better
quick,
pray for a little
You
drizzle.
know, I mean, by God, let it
They're
rain
not
6 inches in Wimberley tonight, and
And that whole
And-
place,
So-
it'll be
They're
gone.
about to learn a
So-
whole
so-
lot.
down at my house.
So back to what you said, that could be done in an environmental ordinance. That's what we probably should do.
Yes.
Bring
You
it
know,
to an
and-
environmental
and I
or
know
separate.
Virginia and I've argued about this too, you know, taking a lot of that vegetation out wasn't wrong. It's how they took it
I
out
agree.
that was the problem. You know, they're going through there with mulching machines on a slope of X percentage, and
Removing the good babies,
Yeah.
keeping the bad, big tree plants. I'm sure Lee, that drove you nuts. I
Debbie?
thought the city had an ordinance that they weren't allowed to bring in fill to the floodway.
Well,
Is that
in,
not true?
I thought-
in the map that I wanted clarity on, and speaking to Lee about that, the area of that hillside between the White House and the bridge, if you look at the map, there's a fine line between the floodway and the floodplain.
Yeah.
And from what he described to me, majority of those 20 truckloads of dirt, at least that were dumped there, were not in the floodway.
But where are they putting all that dirt? Are they leaving
It's-
it exactly where they left
It's
off?
going down the slope too. So when I saw that, I thought that that was in the floodway.
see, and what if you had a natural levee there next to the bridge, and you had that low spot where water flowed through when it gets up to a certain amount. The last time I walked around over there, you know, what they were doing, they were in the process of taking the levee out, for lack of a better term. And, you know, then again, I don't know how they were able to fill. I figured God's gonna take care of it for
Well,
them.
Yeah.
back to the point though, I think we need to be done by an environmental issue
Right.
because look, the state couldn't even take care of the problem. How can,
Well, the town has a lot more.
that's what I'm saying. That's why we have a can ban, you know, let's get back to that. But if we do an environmental ordinance, let's do it that way and get something on the books. So.
But I mean, that the majority of the clearing that was
Protecting them.
done, was that in the gradient boundary or not of the
Their
river?
bodily harm.
Sam, I called Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Yeah.
and I had a discussion with them. And they argued with me and I said, look, my opinion, if you're taking those trees out and you got that slough where it's low and you get a small rise, you're in the gradient boundary because it goes to that slough before it goes over the riverbank.
So you can ask 100
I know.
engineers what the gradient
I know.
boundary is.
That's the problem.
You'll get 100 different answers. Like,
Exactly.
It is so hard for Parks. and
That's
Wildlife.
why we have to do environmental. That's the only way to do it. I think you're totally correct, you know.
I'll give you an example on something.
Like,
This is a really good example of utilizing a professional engineer compared to using one
We'll
that's-
change the definitions for gradient boundary is different.
just saying. Right. As an example.
But the problem is, look at Texas State too. They had that massive pier they put in. They never got a permit. They just did it and they got, I don't know what they got fined. I don't know. I don't know what happened, you know?
Nobody ever
You know, they just, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's got to be an environmental on that issue, I think, because we had a dead end with the state. So, all right.
So we got about halfway done.
Huh?
We got about halfway.
Oh, was that good or bad? What we thought we did?
Yeah. So do you want to schedule another workshop?
What do you, let's
Yeah.
talk about it. Y'all want to talk about it right now?
There's just
Talk about it. Y'all want to talk about it?
some IOUs on the counter.
Guys, you want to talk about guys, girls? You want to talk about
Well, I guess we can have,
the workshop?
these guys are just as.
Because I'd like to get something through by, you know, be nice to
Yeah,
have
I
something we get
would.
to vote on by October.
I think one of the,
Is y'all busy next week?
I think one of the things
Yeah,
that we
I'm not.
would like for you to look at
You're not here next week.
Oh, no, he hasn't.
is where we sent in the
That he's gonna zoom
The-
into.
the-
No, I'm just kidding.
impervious cover. I think that can be
Well,
done
we
as
can
a separate
do,
piece.
I don't.
You know, I mean,
Much faster. And
you know, it's like, because I think there are already definitions in place. We're just asking that those get updated from, you know, like
Right.
you mentioned earlier, 75% or 80%, I can't remember, for commercial, and we're recommending
50.
50%. You
Okay,
know,
real
I'd
quick,
rather recommend 20%, but we figure we get what we.
real quick, we did go on your schedule. When's the next time you could do it? We could do a workshop
Right,
on your
you know
schedule.
what, on the 26th, Jared's busy. The 3rd is Labor Day.
Follow.
First available one would be the 10th.
Let's do it. Ken,
By the way, there's gonna be a
Wait,
public
September
hearing.
10th?
Huh?
September 10th.
Oh, just a minute, I
I
mean,
mean,
October.
so,
Oh, can
So
y'all
the
do
5th is
something?
Labor Day.
yeah, the after Labor,
20 So Jared's busy the 29th. The 5th is Labor Day.
to the 12th. It's a Monday? To the 12th.
What
At 1
time?
o'clock again?
That work for you guys?
Will that work?
Yeah.
1 o'clock.
I can come after that, though.
Okay, that'll work for you?
About the public hearing for the 29th of August, the Langford thing that's going on.
That's a public hearing.
On the 29th.
They scheduled something about last week. And but that's outside of this.
Okay, well, just go for the
This
12th.
is not on topic of this workshop, so.
12th,
I
workshop.
knew there was a reason we
They
came
would-
to the 29th.
And can we maybe get some verbiage going on for our environmental code? We can get that,
I'll show you a quick piece.
get them, do them all at once.
Hearing or meeting?
Let's finish this meeting and then we'll talk about that.
Okay.
The way we can combine them all at that point.
So what did we decide?
So on your next meeting, Mike, we've asked for an agenda item to talk about impervious cover. And specifically what we want changed
For council meeting,
next council meeting.
because that's a much shorter topic of discussion.
Have y'all done any research on the pavers and all that? That's not what San Marcos is using the.
So y'all could do some neat things, like if you
We
do
decide on the
impervious
date,
cover,
the
it only counts as 50% of that total impervious cover. You know, I don't know what the right numbers are, but, you know, if they use rain barrels, that can mitigate impervious cover because it catches that sheet flow runoff. There are things they can do to mitigate impervious cover limits, and it was in that Hayes County code. But I think for simplicity's sake, just changing the numbers from unlimited, what was the one?
The multiple uses had no limit.
No limit. They could literally do 98% impervious cover, no problem. And y'all would get sued if you bought them. So I think you should just change those numbers now. And then if you later you want to say, here are your mitigation tools, and we'll give you more impervious cover, because that's not counting against you, then that's a separate topic. But this is a fast 5-minute conversation.
Okay.
So this is the start. I haven't got, it's not ready yet to be presented, but
Landscapes and waterways.
the draft I've been working on regarding runoff and such. So it's copied a lot from San Marcos, and I'm copy and pasting things into, you know, tree
Right.
provision and other things. I gotta put it all in formatting and looking at the language and stuff, but it's coming.
And that's a new ordinance.
Well, you know what? I'm sure glad I voted for you. City manager.
Sure glad we have.
I'm sure, y'all asked for it. I'm just working on it.
Right?
Well, how many places can you go when the public can come in and put their 2 cents worth in? That's kind of cool about Martindale. So thanks for coming. Thanks for your input. Appreciate it.
Really, I appreciate everybody's input that came today.